The Financial Survival Network, helping you survive and thrive in the new economy. Go to CarrieLutz.com and sign up for 30 free micro trainings on financial survival.
This show is brought to you by Miles Franklin. They've been selling gold and silver for 22 years, and I'm a customer because when you buy, they ship. For more information, go to milesfranklin.com or call them at 800-822-8080. 1490 WGCH. This is Carrie Lutz. You're listening to the Financial Survival Network. Do you think polar bears are dying because the ice caps are melting? Is free market economics really the root of all evil in society today? And can socialism solve all your problems? Joanne Nova is an Australian writer, science presenter, former TV host, and author of the best-selling Skeptic's Handbook, as well as an internationally renowned blogger. Joanne has made a career about answering these types of questions and fights a never-ending war against propaganda, media manipulation, and mass ignorance. Joanne, welcome to the Financial Survival Network.
Thank you.
It's really great to have you on here. And
lovely to be here.
Hey, I've been reading your work for quite a while, and you seem to have an issue about climate change and global warming.
Now, climate change, this is the funniest thing, because I'm called a climate denier, as if anyone would deny that we have a climate. And as for global warming, when someone says, do you believe in global warming? Well, it's not a question of belief, it's a question of the evidence. And I have to say, on what time frame? Because if you're talking about the last 10 years, then it doesn't look like it's been warming much. But if you're talking about the last 150 years, actually the last 300 years, yeah, it has been warming. But if we go back 1,000 years, looks like it's been cooling. I mean, we can play this game all day. You take your pick, warming or cooling. It all depends on how far back you want to go.
Yeah, so before there was an industrial revolution, the climate was getting warmer. We had this thing called the medieval warming period, and then we had the medieval ice age, mini ice age. So it all depends how you measure it. But we've seen these ClimateGate emails come out and be downplayed by the mainstream media, but they seem to be pretty damning of the whole thing and really offer irrefutable proof that the whole man-made global warming is a scam, isn't it?
You know, the funny thing is, from our point of view, blogging before that one came out, ClimateGate did change everything. It set the internet on fire. It was like a rocket had been put underneath people all over the web, people who'd been, a bit skeptical, passively skeptical. They didn't believe in this stuff, but they didn't feel motivated to fight back against it until after those emails were busted out. But for those of us who were blogging before that, what came out in that round of emails, it was fascinating, but it wasn't really anything we didn't already know. The incompetence, the losing the data, the hiding the data, the white lies, the cheating, the things behind the scenes were all things we had guessed that were going on. And we had already had a couple of emails, one of the most famous ones from Phil Jones saying to Warwick Hughes that, why should I let you check my data? You just want to find holes in it. It's a scandal for a scientist to say that. The whole idea of science is that we spend our days trying to find holes in other people's work so that we can lift the game, improve the knowledge of the universe. So, we already knew that they were B-grade scientists and that they were not giving out their data and their references and their methods and their source code and all of that kind of stuff. But, yeah, ClimateGate essentially proved to all the other people out there that that was really going on. And suddenly I had emails from surgeons in Sydney and lawyers in London, nuclear physicists in California, physics professors in Norway. It was, web traffic went up tenfold in the week after that. It was very exciting. So my hat's still off to the person who arranged for those emails to be probably leaked. Of course, we don't know, but it looks like they were leaked out of the Senate, but maybe they were hacked. There's still no evidence either way.
Yeah, this was a big deal because somebody, hacking skills, there's probably thousands of people out there who could actually hack into virtually any system, any place in the world, and pull out their archives. But this was orchestrated. It showed a level of organization that is not typical of the anarchists out there. It showed to me there was some major political or economic force behind the whole thing. And then in the U.S., in the States here, this thing largely got suppressed. The mainstream media has never covered it. There's been very few questions posed to President Obama, like, what's the deal with ClimateGate? How can you still believe in this after it's proven a fraud? Has that been the case in Australia too?
Absolutely. It was. The mainstream media all around the Western world did exactly the same thing. Firstly, they pretended that ClimateGate didn't happen, that it wasn't important. Then when they reported it, they said it was a hacking. And what they reported was the possible hacking of some emails, which still hasn't been proven 2 years later. And they did not quote the text in the emails. Instead, maybe 4 months later, the UK had 3 different investigations into the emails, and suddenly it was okay for the mainstream media to cover that because they could report that all 3 investigations cleared the scientists of any wrongdoing. But you don't need an investigation to understand these emails. You just need to read the emails that they wouldn't report. You know, they're using tricks to hide declines, and they can say that it's a scientific trick to do something, but not a trick to hide something. That's not a trick to get the photocopier to work. That's a trick to hide something from the public. And indeed, it does, in context, completely show scientists doing what they should not be doing, and fraud almost at the highest level. So, yes, it changed everything. Nothing has been quite the same since ClimateGate. So thank goodness to whoever it was that got those out there. We in Australia missed a carbon scheme within the next week by one single vote on our parliament.
Right, and it's going to fail at some point. All of this stuff is going to go back where it came from. And yet, you just pointed out something, the attitude of the mainstream media to play us all, to play you for idiots. They take every one of you out there as a moron who can't separate truth from fiction and can't follow the money and figure out why things are happening. And they must have some reason for believing that. Are you all stupid out there? That's the question, Joanne. Is everybody an idiot who can't figure this stuff out?
Yeah, but, you know, the thing is everybody's really busy and they rely on the media to give them their information. And I think out there a lot of people are what I call passive skeptics. They don't really buy all this stuff that we're told all the time and the big posters that come home from school saying you have to do this, but they haven't got the time to follow it up, to chase it up, and they kind of think, well, most probably the experts are somewhat right and there's something in it, and anyway, we should reduce pollution, shouldn't we? And they don't really think about it. But when I sit down next to them in a plane or a cab or something like that, once I tell people what I do, it's amazing how many of them just come out and say, you know, I always thought that sounded wrong, or I've never liked that stuff. I think people have an unspoken disbelief of the whole thing. They see that in a science debate, one side is being called deniers. Mm-hmm. And I think everybody recognizes that that's not what science is about.
Yeah. I mean, it's they call you flat earthers. They call you just the worst things. And this Al Gore is just the
don't
worst.
Forget the tobacco link.
Yeah. The tobacco
I mean,
link.
this is how desperate can you get? Poor old Fred Singer, I think, once did a very eminent skeptic, a man with decades of experience at the highest levels of the sort of physics in the US, advising presidents and whatnot. And he did a study once where he reported on the statistical odds of passive smoking. Now, no one that I know of has found a problem with what he did. He says he doesn't like smoking, but some group contacted him and asked him to do it. He didn't know it was funded by some other tobacco group. But in any case, whether or not, even if he was funded directly by a tobacco group, and he wasn't, but if he was, it doesn't matter because what he reported was strictly straight science. He did the statistical analysis on it, and the passive smoking study didn't stand up. It's nothing to do with the link between cancer and people who smoke. It's about passive smoking, but it always gets portrayed as if, you know, we're deniers of smoking and cancer and we take money from tobacco institutes, and it's all 20 years old, but Naomi Oreskes is still bringing it up and selling books called The Merchant of Doom. And she is the merchant, the merchant of doubt, she calls us, and yet she is the merchant of doubt. She's the one selling doubts about people like Fred Singer and other skeptics. And with all of these things, it is almost like whatever they say about us is actually where they're at. Its projection is just running rife.
Oh, it's, yeah. What does it have to do with it? So many times that is a means that the left, and I don't want to make this a right-left thing, I would say the statists use it to attack people. They never get to the basis of the argument. They find a flaw or a nit, and they start picking at it, and it's totally unrelated to the argument.
Well,
they just distract.
I have to say that's a very good point, and it is no coincidence. The kind of people who can form good, logical, reasoned arguments, I'm really going to go out on a limb here, the kind of people who can form good, logical, reasoned arguments are competitive in the real world, and they like a system where they compete with each other. The kind of people who really struggle to understand reason and logic and think that opinions count for something and can't quite tell what's opinion and what's evidence, those people need a world where big government looks after them, and they are more likely to be statists. So I think it's absolutely no accident at all that we get lost in these ad hominem attacks, because that is what they do.
Yeah. And I just finished taking a course on the internet and rhetoric, and we could discuss that another time because I learned a lot. It's things I already knew, but they actually had names. That's what I learned about these types of attacks.
I want to get studies of philosophy, rhetoric, and Aristotelian logic back into primary school. I think we would do kids such a favour. We could teach them how to spot the crooks, to spot the con men, to spot people who were selling them something that didn't exist, and through the use of rhetoric and logic and reason. And to me, it's one of those essential tools, and I wasn't even taught it in my science degree.
Yeah. I had one course in logic in college that I found invaluable because I did a lot of computer programming, and without logic, you can't program. It's impossible because you'll never be able to figure out where the error is in your program and fix it. And it's the same thing in life, because if you don't have the ability to logically attack and analyze what you've done, then you can't change it. And the same thing when you're dealing with dishonest people. When you're dealing with people who want to deceive you, you need to examine their statements, because inevitably there will be inconsistencies in their statements, and they will be, these statists play on your emotions. They don't play on logic. They try to evoke emotional responses through various symbols and statements to get you over to their point of view. And when you hear about the government cutting a program in the States, the first thing they do is get a poster child. Oh, we have this poor mentally handicapped kid who is going to be starved to death and won't be able to get any therapy because these evil people want to take away their government payouts. And you see this over and over, and people never look past the surface. And that's a big, big problem, which leads to the next question, which is, we saw the Iron Curtain come crashing down, and it was improperly, in my opinion, portrayed as the triumph of good versus evil, the triumph of capitalism and free markets over collectivism. And the fact is, in the States and in most of the world, we hadn't had any free markets since the outbreak of central banking and income taxes. And this whole paradigm really should have been, hey, we have a deteriorating free market against no free market, no freedom whatsoever. Look how this handicapped free market defeated the Iron Curtain, the collectivist. Imagine what free markets left to their own devices could accomplish in a much faster period of time. And, the thing is, how do we get that message out? How do we educate people so that they can understand this?
Maybe it's an Australian thing. I'm not even sure that many Australians see that as necessarily being the free market versus communism. It's sort of, I think the lesson's vague, and if you ask people that, they'd probably agree with you, but it's just not something that's thought of that much, and that's quite scary. I would think we'd be advancing if we could just make sure everyone in the world knew that the US won that competition because it was a freer market.
Yeah,
to me, that would be a step up in the world, just to remind everyone that the smaller government variety achieve the power over the big government variety. But even then, yes, people they say, it's frustrating. Yes, but I agree. People misinvoke the term free markets all the time. For example, the carbon market. All the people clamouring for a carbon market are, in my opinion, the ones who don't understand what a free market is. It's always the cries from the left, isn't it? We need a free market to do this. Or else they're the people who've got their hand in the pot and they're happy to take some money from what is essentially a fake free market. To me, there's nothing free about the carbon market that's operating at the EU, which is collapsing as we speak. The prices reached record lows a few weeks ago. And that market, I mean, it's based on carbon dioxide, which is a ubiquitous gas everywhere around the planet, coming off from everything, including forests and oceans. You can't tax that. Who's going to pay on behalf of the cows and the sheep and the trees? No one. So already you've got exceptions to the rule, and the exceptions pile on the exceptions. I mean, this market is fixed from the beginning. The supply is fixed, the demand is fixed. There's no reason for this market if it's not government fiat. So it's just another fiat currency, but it's probably even worse in terms of being able to look out for corruption, for cheating, and for counterfeiting. It's worse and harder to manage than the good old US of A dollar market. So to me, this is just the shonkiest version of a government fiat currency around, and it's no wonder that they've had continuous problems with auditors being busted for not doing the auditing they said they'd do, for people promising to do things. Oh, the funniest one was one in Spain. Have you heard about the solar units in Spain that worked at night?
No, I haven't. Oh, yeah. We don't get exposed. Yeah.
They did. They discovered people were generating solar electricity at night, and someone finally got onto this and went out to investigate. And their solar panels were sitting on their roof, but they'd bypassed the line to diesel generators out the back. And they were getting the solar tariff, of course. They wanted the feed-in tariffs that they were enjoying, which were better than just producing electricity. So it was worth their while. It made economic sense to go and pay for diesel generators so that they could pick up their solar credits.
Just a total scam.
Isn't it?
And that's what happens when the government's involved, when the government makes the rules, and when the government forces parties to act in a certain way. You have malinvestment, you have failure guaranteed. And again, the only cure to this is free markets, keeping the government out. And yet the number of people in the world that actually understand this and want to see it happen, while I believe it's been growing, is still a relatively small minority, isn't it?
Well, it is, and I think you're right. We do need to push people to define what a free market is and to make sure we stop people from jumping up and down and saying, hey, that's a free market when it isn't. Because then they blame afterwards when it collapses. They say, see, well, free markets don't work, or they blame the capitalist pigs for causing the collapse when the actual answer was the regulators from the start creating impossible regulations. So, but of course, when things collapse, as I'm so hoping the EU will break up and go back to being separate nations again. But when it collapses, there's the danger of the big government fans stepping in and saying, hey, well, it wouldn't have collapsed if we were in charge. So, give us one European government instead of these token little efforts.
Yeah, and give us one world government, because that way we wouldn't have the economic crisis that the world's going through now. If only we had a global currency, you would be safe from government confiscation. And then we know what's going to happen with a global currency. Nobody's accountable to anybody, as unaccountable as central bankers are. But then they'll just be able to print up units to their heart's content, and no country will be able to stop it.
And there will be no escape.
Exactly.
Yes, yes. No, I'm right with you. Recently, it was very influential, our government here, the leader of the Greens Party here, which kind of holds the coalition government. Bob Brown stood up and said, he essentially couldn't believe that we didn't want a world democracy. What's wrong with a world democracy? And, I posted on my blog that we want a democracy too, but we want 200 democracies. We want lots of democracies all competing in a free market with each other, not a monopolistic version, not a single one. And I just don't think it's ever entered his head or others of that persuasion. It's never crossed their mind that there is a bigger form of democracy than one government.
Oh, for sure. Now, let me ask you a question. In the States, we have dumbed down schools. I mean, they deliberately don't teach history. They don't teach economics. They don't teach Latin. There's, as we have a comedian, Jackie Mason. I'm sure you've never heard of him, but he said, when I went to school, they gave homework. Nowadays they give out condoms, and that's what we're faced with. Is that happening in Australia too? Are schools deliberately dumbed down so that
we certainly have had that, and I think there are lots of reasons for that. But it's very much something over here. And the history I was taught at school was, at times it was useless. And it wasn't until I grew up and moved on that I suddenly realised how fascinating and important history could be.
Yeah.
So yes, we have had a lot of that over here too. There's been a resurgence here recently of phonics, teaching kids to read by actually explaining how to break the words up into sounds and things.
Proven method.
Great.
Proven method. Always works.
It's fantastic that it's coming back. We had a guy in Melbourne, who his name's John Fleming, who absolutely set the schools on fire by taking over a school that was one of the lowest, most backwards, badly scoring ones in the state. And he just said, I'm going to raise my expectations. I'm going to expect the children to turn up. I'm going to expect them to behave well. We're going to improve relations between teachers and adults. We're going to tell them what they're going to learn. We're going to test them on it. We're going to explain why they learned it or didn't learn it. We're going to practice till they get it. And he went back to phonics and explicit teaching. It's got all fancy new names, but I recognise what was the system that we used to have a long time ago. His school rocketed up through the ranks, and it did so well. It improved right up to the top quartile within a few years. It was an amazing transformation. And of course, thank goodness, the message is being picked up by people all around the country, and schools all around the country are switching on. So there is some hope that at least we're getting reading and writing slightly better, because we had lost a lot of ground. I mean, even, one of mine at school wasn't being taught anything. The alphabet song was too much for kindergarten. Finger painting only gets you so far.
Yeah, we call them the 3 R's: reading, writing, and arithmetic. And, that's something, we had a similar guy about 20 years ago named Joe Clark, and he was a legend. And there was a movie done about him called Lean on Me, and he took the worst performing high school in New Jersey, in the state of New Jersey, large African-American population. And they said that they'll never be able to pass the state basic test. And he went in there with a baseball bat. The first day he got up on the stage, and he had all the teachers bring the troublemakers up, and he expelled them all. He said, "You can't come back to this school. You're hereby expurgated. Have a good life." And sent them on their way. Then he chained up all the fire exits so that the drug dealers could not get into school during the day, and erased all the graffiti, totally revitalized the place, and had run-ins with everybody you could imagine, because the parents were outraged, the Board of Education was outraged, but somehow he stayed in there. And at one point they put him in jail for chaining up these fire exits, and yet when the test results came in, the school passed, and it was a total turnaround in less than a year. And then, of course, he was there for a few years, had a massive coronary, had to retire, and the school went right back and eventually was taken over by the state. But this is the type of thing that happens over and over, and yet nobody can figure out how to turn around the educational system in the U.S. because we have government control, we have unions, and all that awful stuff. So, hey, we've got to kind of wrap up. Joanne, people looking to find out more about you and your work, where do they find you? JoanneNova.com.au, and we do all things related to freedom and science and climate science, and sometimes we take a funny look at things with a bit of a satirical bent, and sometimes we get right down to the tin tack numbers and bust them. But I always try and explain things so that people can understand who haven't come here with a background from university physics or something. So the aim is to make it as understandable as possible. And as interesting, and you have to entertain, you got to be humorous, because the fact is, if you just concentrate on the negatives, it will drive you to distraction and will make you throw up your hands in disgust. So we got to keep our sense of humor and our goals in mind.
We do, absolutely. But, you know, when the world is my oyster, in a sense, I'm talking about the universe, there are so many fascinating things out there. Sometimes the content just sells itself. And, you know, the fact that we get warmer and colder years all the time, no one explained to me until recently when I met an absolute genius in Australia that it was because of the oceans. And think about the oceans covering 70% of the planet. They're average 4 kilometres deep. So there's a lot of water out there. Now, I didn't realise that most of that water is sitting below 2 degrees Celsius. So you might have to translate that for everyone. But it's 2 Celsius degrees above freezing.
Yeah, that's so about 36 degrees or so. Somewhere
okay, well, we're
Fahrenheit.
Talking super cold water that's on the verge of freezing, and that is the bottom 3 kilometres of the depth of the 70% of the surface of the planet. So there's this enormous wall of cold water underneath there. And every now and again, the oceans stir up just a slightly different way. And all that cold water comes up closer to the surface, where it just absolutely sucks the heat out of our atmosphere. I mean, our atmosphere is only really 10 kilometres thick is the atmosphere that we get our weather from and our clouds and things. Sure. 50 kilometres thick, and it's very thin up there. So 10 kilometres of this wafer-thin air, and that ocean just sucks the heat right out of it. So that's when we get El Niños and La Niñas and those massive changes in temperature within a year. And it's just the ocean drawing that heat out of the sky. And when you explain it like that, then it becomes so understandable. You know, don't need a degree to follow what's going on and why there's so much noise in our climate.
And don't forget the solar flare-ups and the volcanic under-ocean volcanic subterranean activity with all those heat vents that come out. And when you add all that stuff in, there's so many other explanations other than the few things that man does.
Well, exactly. And when they talk about ocean acidification, they usually don't mention that, apart from the fact that it's not acidic, that we have natural variations and swings of ocean pH scales that are larger within a single day sometimes on a reef than what they're worried about and panicking about happening over the next 100 years. I mean, maybe we will see a slight shift, although evidence suggests perhaps we won't. But the amazing thing is the natural variability is there anyway, and obviously the corals survive. So, yes, anyway, the picture's always bigger, and we can go on and on all day, I'm sure.
For sure. Well, hey, thanks again for being on the Financial Survival Network. People can go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com, find your interview, find other interviews that we're doing, and we will talk to you again soon.
That would be great, Kerry.
All right, thanks.